Ralph Waldo Emerson said all great speakers were bad speakers at first, and this quote shows why it's important for us to all practice our public speaking so that one day we could all be great speakers. I, in the past couple of days, reviewed a couple of my classmates' speeches. I chose Adam Eckler's Why to Learn an Instrument from a Teacher speech, Jaden Adder's Rethinking Evolution speech, and Sydney Bishop's Gene Editing speech. For Adam's speech on why to learn an instrument from a teacher, his attention getter was a pretty effective quote that about the quality of teachers and how a superior teacher or a superior teacher inspires you instead of just teaches you. And I thought it was partially effective because it was a great quote, but there was, he didn't mention who the quote was from. It was just kind of like a cool idea instead of an actual quote. So it could have been stronger if he had who originally said the quote. His proposition statement was that human teachers are needed to learn an instrument despite access to the amount of information we have today, and then it's more effective to learn from a teacher as opposed to teaching yourself. His 3 points were that teachers can provide real-time feedback, they can help decide next steps while learning, and can discern what information is useful. For his evidence, he used comparisons. He used an analogy of learning how to throw a baseball, which I thought was particularly effective because a lot of people play sports and could relate to learning how to throw a baseball or any kind of ball. And he talked about how muscle memory is can go either way. It can be a good thing if you learn the muscle memory the right way, or it can be a bad thing if you learn the muscle memory the wrong way. So just as if you learn how to throw a baseball wrong and you do it a bunch of times, then you're going to have to unlearn that before you relearn the right way. So, and as he said, it's the same way with an instrument, with learning an instrument. So I thought that was a pretty good, a good comparison, a good analogy. He also had he cited an article in there that was good. And something I really appreciated was he had stories of his own experiences learning guitar and piano. He had some scales for his guitar, and then he showed how he, when he first learned an A minor chord, how he wanted to play it and how you're actually supposed to play it, something that his teacher helped him learn. His closing statement was not very memorable. He just commented on his own opening quote. He didn't even say his quote over again from the beginning. So it was not a particularly memorable closing statement. But his delivery was great. He had good eye contact. He didn't really have any gestures, though, but he did have an energetic tone, smooth transitions, and he obviously cared about the subject material and had prepared very well. I thought the biggest strength of this speech was his personal stories, especially with the piano and the guitar scales that he showed. But I thought the biggest improvement could be his closing statement because it wasn't very memorable at all. I was thinking maybe he could use a new quote or even just repeat his opening quote at the very least instead of just mentioning it. So next we're going to move on to Jaden's speech about rethinking evolution, which I thought was a particularly interesting subject, especially because I personally study biology, and evolution. So it's interesting to get a different perspective on evolution because in most of the circles I run in, it's accepted pretty much as fact, which was the point of his speech, that evolution should be approached with more skepticism. His attention getter was a quote from Charles Darwin, which was effective. Definitely drew me in. As I said earlier, his proposition was that evolution should be approached with more skepticism. And his points were one, there's a lack of transitional evidence. There is no distinction between macro and microevolution, and that false predispositions are present within the theory of evolution. His research seemed pretty solid. Definitely had a lot of information in his presentation. He talked about the fossils of lobe-finned fish, but unfortunately there wasn't really a citation in there. I also thought he could have given a little more background information because, for example, when he's talking about a lack of transitional evidence, he doesn't really mention what transitional fossils are and why they're important. And for someone who doesn't study biology, they may not understand exactly why those are so important in the theory of evolution if he doesn't mention it. He also mentioned genetic mutations could not make organs or other structural parts of animals because they're typically harmful, which I thought was an interesting point because that's a question I've raised in my own research. It is kind of weird that genetic mutations seem to be the main unit for evolution, but again, as he said, they're typically harmful. He also had a good analogy of comparing the buildings to structures found in nature, such as, for example, one argument for evolution is that our hands look fairly similar to, let's say, the bones in a whale's fin.